What's up, squad? It's Brandon from the Bantu Sun. Thank you so much for joining me today. So, I'm one of the believers that if you do what you love, you have a passion for it, you'll learn life lessons throughout, whether you're in ballet, a boxer, a writer, whatever. And I find life lessons in geopolitics because it's a great passion of mine. And one of the lessons I wanted to talk about is about how this whole life, as I learned lessons throughout my life, this whole game of life is so much, if not all, about time and distance. And I mean that literally, but I also mean that figuratively, right? And I'll give you a good example geopolitically, and then I'll translate it over. As you know, geopolitically, I always think America has been a great geopolitical player. Um, when the Europeans came over here, coming from the resource-starved continent of Europe, relatively speaking, the space-starved continent of Europe, coming from that overly competitive environment of Europe, and they got to America and they saw wide open space and natives. They were like a hot knife through butter, and they took to this land like a duck takes to water. And you can compare and contrast America with Mexico. So when the Americans got here later, right? The British got to America later than the Spanish did, right? But the early Spaniards, and this is always drawn as a contrast, the Spanish were always in pursuit of riches, right? The Spanish were a martial people at this time, the greatest soldiers on the continent, perhaps. They're a part of the Habsburg Empire. So, as you know, empires are going to be cash strapped, they need money. And they were zealots. So, the financiers, Sephardic Jews, the Dutch, they didn't take too kind to them because when the Christians took over, they had took over after 700 years of Islamic rule, and one of the defining traits of the Spanish was their Christian zealotry. So when they came over, that became when they took over the Iberian Peninsula, it became more and more prevalent. You know, the Inquisitions, etc., and they started to oppress many people outside of that. It forced a lot of that's where you get the Huguenots. You get these Protestant French people that leave the country and search for other opportunities. So when the Spanish took over the Iberian Peninsula, they created a lot of economic outflow migration. Now this is important because it's two ways to earn money, right? One is to earn it through trade, and the other is through theft. And because the Spanish, they felt they exhausted the trade aspect and they oppressed a lot of the more commercially oriented aspects of their empire, they went to thievery, right? And this is where you get just full on coming to the continent of America and seeking gold and silver and enslaving the people to mine the gold and the silver. And this is always considered interesting because although the Spanish was here first, they did, outside of populating the continents, they did a pretty poor job. And even that, you can say they did a pretty poor job in comparison to what the British did in America, say United States. But they did a pretty poor job of actually utilizing the space of the Americas. They could have built an empire in the Americas that would last it to this day and given them longevity throughout the courses of human, the entire human existence. But because they focused solely on pillaging and gold and silver and oppression, it kind of left the Spanish world without direction because everything was transactional. There was no investment made. The Spanish didn't come to the Americas to settle and populate with families and such as the Americans in the United States. And people always say this is most evident in Argentina. Argentina is a massive, beautiful country, but Argentina has a relatively small population in the tens of millions. I want to say around 30, 40 millions, if that. And not even to the level of Italy is Argentina populated, even though it is extremely large. Argentina is probably roughly around the high single digits, probably like the seventh largest country in the world, full of agricultural resources, great rivers. Rio de Plata river system is river drainage basin is one of the great in the world. Not as large as Mississippi, but exceptional in its own right. But you got southern Brazil, you got Uruguay, Paraguay, Argentina. You have a great river network there. You have bountiful agriculture, and Argentina was never really utilized until the early 20th century, late 19th to early 20th century, centuries after the Spanish came to Americas. And the Spanish based their empire around the silver discovered in Mexico and Peru, off of the resources. So you contrast that with Americans that came here for various reasons, but primarily to settle. And they built up. It was no Spanish, it was no silver and gold in the original 13 colonies. It was some plantation work. You had some good land in the South, but it was in the 13 colonies, only 4 states were considered Confederate or Southern: Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Most of the United States was the Northeast. Your cold weather states with not so much good soil. And the people, along with partnerships with Native Americans, and sometimes in opposition to them, they built up land and they made the land work for them. And they opened the borders for immigration for enterprising people. Now, why do I say all this? Because even though the Americans came here later, when things went south between the United States and Mexico in the Mexican American War under James K. Polk, the America thumped Mexico. It wasn't even close. Like the Americans went to Mexico City. It cut off a large portion of Mexico, the Southwest, because the Spaniards were everywhere, but they settled where they can extract resources, the gold and silver. So America was able to unify because they invested in the land, and they unified quickly. And this is where you get the concept of when I talk about time. A lot of people say because the Spanish didn't invest and settle, it was really no direction. Even the independence of the Americans, the Latin, the Spanish-speaking Americas, came because of Napoleon's invasion of the Iberian Peninsula. It became because of the fall of Spain. Not so much as these colonies rebelled. These colonies never saw themselves divisible from the empire, right? They saw themselves as indivisible to the empire. They were one. The class structure, everything was built around. This is the Iberian Peninsula was the motherland, and these were colonial appendages. Regardless that they were immensely bigger, immensely richer than Spain could ever be. Whereas the Americans got over here, and it's like, why are we giving so much authority to puny Britain? And then they rebelled against this. So, doing so, they were able to capitalize on time, unify further, which made them more efficient. I always tell people a great trait to have is maturity, and I call maturity being where you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to be doing, finding your life calling. And some people have this at a very, very early age. And it's because of the exponential compounding benefit of time. I think degeneracy is like when you find people that are degenerates or they're lost in life, it's because they're usually time wasters, right? They are people that don't utilize the most of their time. And if you understand how important time is, that in the future, there will be a moment that has never existed before. And in the past, there were moments that would never exist again. Understand how precious every single second is. Like, to me, it's hard to squander that. Now, of course, I'm not saying that there's to sit and wait for things to happen. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying carpe diem. Now, you have to seize the day. Understand that the faster you get to something, the sooner it can be accomplished. And then on top of that, you have the compounding benefit of time. So, understanding that time, which is infinite, finite for us, but infinite in space, right? In such an upward space, because we live in infinity, right? But we are finite. Energy is finite, but distance is time is infinite. So understand this paradox that we exist in. It is so important that one not squander opportunity. You have to make hay while the sun is out, or you might get caught being, because as I say, if you don't advance, you fall back, and those that fall back fall under. You may be surpassed by other people who don't waste their time. I assure you that the true test of a relationship, any relationship, is how well somebody respects your time. Because I've seen, I've seen people, their relationship fall apart because they're not getting the time they're expecting from another person. They believe that other person's time belongs to them to a certain degree. You need to utilize your time. Ask yourself, create a timeshare and say, of my day, how much of my time do I put around empowering me or put around activities that would eventually empower me? And then how much of my time do I give away to other people? And I think a lot of people will be surprised with that question. So I just wanted to get on because I just thought it was such a valuable lesson. I cannot emphasize the importance of time and distance enough. Life is all about getting to where you having direction, your distance, because you have to know where you're going, and the amount of time it takes to get there, and positioning yourself. This is why geopolitics matters. This is why geostrategy matters. It's the art of positioning, the art of occupying strategic space. So just be cognizant of this, be aware of it, and utilize it to enrich yourself. And don't waste your time and distance on people that are not worthy of it, or situations that are not worthy of it, because it's the most precious thing a person have. This is true freedom. The ability to dictate what you do with your time and how well you can do it. So there's always go back to a version of self-empowerment, which is why we try to create, or this is why we try to have conversation that promotes sober thinking, critical and sober thinking. So that's my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, share, subscribe if you enjoy the content. I look forward to our next conversation. Until then, take care. Bantu up.